She would enter a room and men would literally stop breathing. A French diplomat fainted when he saw her at a reception in New York. Italian filmmaker Visconti spent 3 hours on his knees in the middle of a Manhattan restaurant, begging her to star in his film. A prominent DC artist painted 17 portraits of her, then destroyed them all because not one captured even 1/10 of her magnetism. But the worst came later. This woman, capable of stopping a crowd with a single glance, died in absolute solitude. Neighbors found her only 3 days later. On the table lay a note, but what was written in it, investigators classified for 50 years. Today we tell you a story that will take your breath away. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. Portland, Oregon, 1954. 20-year-old Celeste Whitmore arrived in New York City for the first time to audition for modeling agencies. A girl from the provinces, daughter of a timber mill foreman. She looked like hundreds of other aspiring models, except for one thing. When she walked past the reception desk at the Ford modeling agency, the director, a weathered woman named Eleanor Price, suddenly stopped mid-sentence and watched her all the way to the elevator. Then she quietly said to her assistant, "Remember this girl. She'll either become legendary or she'll be destroyed. There's no middle ground." A strange prophecy, wasn't it? But stranger still was what happened next. In Celeste Whitmore's file, which was kept in the agency archives, a peculiar mark appeared, a small red dot in the corner of the folder. Such marks were only placed on files of models who represented special interest to certain organizations. And this was 4 years before she first walked a runway in Paris. Why would an ordinary girl from Portland attract the attention of those who preferred to remain in shadows? The answer came many years later, when certain documents were declassified. It turned out that within the CIA there existed a special division dealing with cultural diplomacy, and this division had a project codenamed Showcase. The essence of the project was to create the perfect image of the American woman for the global stage. Beautiful, educated, sophisticated. A woman who would demonstrate the superiority of the American system without a single word about politics. The first contact happened during her second year in New York. A man approached Celeste at a cafe in Greenwich Village. He introduced himself as Richard Caldwell, a language instructor at Columbia University. He offered her free French lessons. "You have exceptional aptitude for languages," he explained. Celeste agreed. Only 30 years later did it emerge that no Richard Caldwell ever taught at Columbia University. In reality, this was Major Vincent Hayes, CIA operative, graduate of the farm, specialist in handling special assets. His task was to prepare Celeste for a role she didn't yet suspect existed. French lessons quickly transformed into sessions on etiquette, art history, diplomatic protocol fundamentals. "Why do I need all this?" Celeste would ask. "An educated woman should know everything," her mentor would reply. Parallel to this, other oddities occurred. Celeste was offered a lease on a studio apartment in the Upper East Side. "A client canceled," explained her agency. "You can have it at a discount." The neighbors turned out to be quiet, polite people who never asked unnecessary questions. Only many years later would she learn that all of them were CIA operatives or assets. Then came that fateful meeting. 1957, Bergdorf Goodman. Celeste was trying on a coat when an elegant woman approached her. "Dear, have you ever thought about international modeling?" This was Vivian Hartley, legendary director of the Hartley Agency on Fifth Avenue. The meeting seemed random, but was it really? In CIA archives, a curious document survived, a service memo dated March 12, 1957. Subject successfully guided to target point. Hartley executed instructions, awaiting further operation development. Signature illegible, but the stamp authentic. Celeste came to the Hartley agency. She was accepted immediately, without audition, unheard of. Colleagues whispered, connections. But what connections could a girl from Portland have? The answer was simple and terrifying simultaneously. Her backing came from those who could open any door and silence any voice. Training at the agency proceeded parallel with other training. In the evenings, a black Lincoln would pick up Celeste and drive her to an estate in Connecticut. There they taught her to remember faces and names, notice details, maintain necessary conversations. "You'll be representing our country," they told her. "Your beauty is a weapon in the battle for hearts and minds." Paris, 1961, Orly Airport. An American delegation of models exits the plane. At the front, Celeste Harrington. Yes, Harrington now. She'd married photographer Gregory Harrington, and this surname opened even more doors. But right now, something else matters. 3 days before departure, Celeste was summoned to Langley. Not with an official summons, they simply called her apartment and said, "We're expecting you." She knew refusal wasn't an option. In an office with high ceilings and heavy curtains, she was met by Colonel Morrison. Silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes, he spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, which made his words sound even more menacing. "Celeste," he began, lighting a cigarette, "you're not going just to show dresses. You're going to show the world the face of the new American woman, beautiful, free, successful." He paused, exhaled smoke. "But freedom is a relative concept, isn't it?" A folder appeared on the desk. Photographs. Celeste went cold. In the pictures was her younger sister Diane, who lived in Portland with their ailing mother. The photos were fresh, from yesterday. "Don't worry," the colonel smiled. "Your family is fine and will remain fine, provided you're sensible." The briefing lasted 4 hours. Celeste was explained who she could interact with and who was absolutely forbidden. Given photographs of people she needed to accidentally meet at receptions, taught how to inconspicuously overhear conversations and remember details. "You're not a spy," the colonel emphasized. "You're simply an observant American citizen." In Paris, the delegation was assigned a chaperone, Margaret Sullivan, a plump, good-natured woman about 50. She seemed like a harmless aunt, but Celeste noticed Margaret never slept. Even at night, passing by her room, you could see a strip of light under the door. And she had phenomenal memory. She remembered every word spoken by any delegation member during the day. The show at Pierre Cardin's became a triumph. When Celeste walked the runway in a white evening gown, the hall froze in absolute silence for several seconds, then exploded in applause. After the show, Cardin himself approached her. "Mademoiselle, you embody the American mystery," he said in French. Celeste responded with a rehearsed phrase about friendship between peoples, but Cardin persisted. He invited her to dinner. "Go," Margaret unexpectedly said, then added quietly, "But remember the boundaries of what's permissible." What did she mean? Celeste understood later when the cultural attaché from the American embassy accidentally joined their table at the restaurant. Celeste's life turned into a performance where she played herself, but following someone else's script. Each trip abroad was accompanied by new assignments. They became increasingly sophisticated. Rome, 1963. At a reception honoring an American art exhibition opening, Celeste was approached by Italian industrialist Giovanni Rossellini. Wealthy, influential, crazy about American women. A handler from the embassy whispered to Celeste, "Be nice to him." What nice meant required no explanation. Rossellini fell in love, gave jewelry that Celeste was obligated to turn in at the embassy, wrote letters that were read before she saw them, invited her to his villa in Tuscany, where she went accompanied by her friend, Captain Nina Volkov of the CIA, who spoke perfect Italian and could read lips. But the worst began when Celeste truly fell in love. Not with Rossellini, with French photographer Jean-Louis Dubois. He was shooting her for Vogue, and between them arose what CIA reports delicately called non-target emotional contact. Dubois was married but ready to leave everything for Celeste. He offered her to stay in France, promised divorce, a new life, freedom. Celeste remained silent. She knew every one of their dates was being watched. Her hotel room had microphones. She found one accidentally when she dropped her compact behind the bed. After that, she would turn on the bathroom water when she wanted to cry, so they wouldn't hear. One night there was a knock on her Paris hotel room door. On the threshold stood a man she'd never seen before, but immediately understood who he was. "Miss Whitmore," he said in English with a slight Georgian accent. "You're playing a dangerous game. Monsieur Dubois isn't who he claims to be." The stranger laid photographs on the table. Dubois in the company of people Celeste recognized. These were French communists she'd met at receptions. "He works for French counterintelligence," the guest continued, "using you to get to our people. Do you understand what this means?" Whether this was truth or lie, Celeste never learned, but she had no choice. The next day she told Dubois it was over between them. He didn't believe it, begged for explanation. She stayed silent. A week later, the delegation returned to New York, and a month later, Celeste learned from French newspapers that Jean-Louis Dubois had crashed his car on a mountain road in the Alps. Accident, journalists wrote. Celeste knew. In their world, there are no accidents. In their Manhattan apartment, her husband, Gregory Harrington, waited. Talented photographer, son of a famous art dealer. He lived in his world of bohemia and art. Did he know about his wife's double life? He suspected, but stayed silent. He had his own secrets, his own meetings that weren't spoken about aloud. Their marriage became a screen behind which each hid their pain. Imagine for a second. You wake up in your Manhattan apartment on Central Park West. Luxurious apartment, by the way. 3 bedrooms, high ceilings, park views. For most Americans in the 60s, an unattainable dream. You approach the window, pull back the heavy curtain, and see a black Lincoln in the street below. It's there every morning. Sometimes it changes position, first near one entrance, then another, but it's always there. You go to the kitchen to make coffee, rare, expensive, brought from your last trip to Italy. You turn on the radio and immediately turn it off because, they listen not only to what you say, but to what you listen to. Paranoia? Oh, if only. This is exactly how Celeste Harrington lived. Every day. Every damn day of her brilliant, successful, absolutely unbearable life. Here's a document found in declassified archives, dated October 1964. Subject, Swan, that's what they called her, shows signs of emotional instability. Attempts to violate surveillance protocol have increased. Recommend strengthening control. Signed, Major Hayes. The same one who once taught her French. And what was this violation of protocol? Celeste did the unthinkable. She tried to call her mother in Portland from a payphone, not from her home phone, which was tapped, but from an ordinary booth near the subway. 35 cents. Dial tones. Mother's voice. "Sweetheart, how are you?" And then the connection cuts off. Not by itself. It was interrupted. An hour later, the phone rang in her apartment. "Miss Harrington, you're expected at the studio for a fitting." There was no fitting, of course. There was a conversation in the back room of the Hartley agency. Colonel Morrison. Yes, he'd already made colonel. He spoke quietly, almost tenderly. "Why these foolish things? Want to talk to Mom? Please, we'll arrange her visit to New York. Nice hotel, excursions." You understand what the horror was? They didn't threaten directly. They cared. surrounded with such dense cocoon of attention that breathing became impossible. Personal physician from the CIA, hairdresser, an informant. Even the massage therapist at the agency regularly wrote reports about the subject's mood. And here, the story takes a completely unexpected turn. Summer 1965. Celeste on tour in London. After a show, an elderly gentleman approaches her, introduces himself as Michael Collins, journalist for The Times, speaks with a slight British accent. "I know who you are, and I know you want out of this game." Celeste looks around. The chaperone is distracted by conversation with organizers. "I have an offer," Collins says quickly. "Political asylum, new documents, British intelligence protection. Decide quickly. Tomorrow you fly out." She said, "No." Why? Let's examine the psychology of a person cornered. In New York, Celeste had her husband. Though their marriage was fiction, Gregory was the only person who accepted her as she was. In Portland, her mother and sister. What would happen to them if she ran? But mainly, listen to this carefully, she still believed she could outplay the system, that her beauty, fame, connections would help her break free from the web. Naivety? Or a last attempt to preserve dignity? Collins disappeared as suddenly as he'd appeared, and 2 days later, back in New York, Celeste was summoned to Federal Plaza. Not to Langley, higher, FBI headquarters. There she was met by a man she'd never seen but whose name everyone knew. J. Edgar Hoover himself. The director of the FBI, America's most powerful unelected official. "Miss Harrington," he began without offering her a seat, "you were made a certain offer in London." It wasn't a question. Celeste remained silent. "You acted correctly," he continued. "But," he paused, removed his glasses, wiped them, "trust has been undermined. Rehabilitation is necessary." What he meant by rehabilitation became clear a week later. Celeste was assigned a new handler. If Colonel Morrison had been a tough professional of the old school, then Agent Bradford, this was an entirely different type. Young, barely 30, handsome, with that specific beauty cultivated in elite CIA units, and absolutely pathologically cruel. Bradford began by staging a jealousy scene with Celeste. Yes, jealousy. Publicly, at a reception at the Waldorf Astoria. He approached when she was talking to a French correspondent and said, in English, loudly enough for others to hear, "Again with your lovers?" Everyone turned. Celeste tried to leave. He grabbed her arm, not painfully but firmly. "We'll talk," he promised. The conversation took place that same night. Bradford came to her apartment, simply opened the door with his key, where did he get it, and entered. Gregory was in his dark room working on prints. Bradford walked into the living room, poured himself bourbon from a crystal decanter, sat in an armchair. "You know what your problem is, Celeste. You think you're a star, but you're a tool. Beautiful, useful, but a tool. And when a tool starts to dull," he didn't finish the sentence, just smiled. Then began what CIA documents would call Operation Psychological Correction. Bradford systematically destroyed Celeste's life. First, invitations to international shows disappeared. Didn't pass security clearance. Then Gregory started having problems. His photographs suddenly stopped selling. Gallery shows were canceled. Sister Diane in Portland lost her teaching job. Ideological incompatibility. Celeste understood. This was revenge for London, for Collins, for the very attempt to think about freedom. But the worst awaited her ahead. One evening, her friend, model Elena Metelkina, came to visit. Brought a bottle of wine, sat in the kitchen, and suddenly burst into tears. "Celeste, they're making me spy on you." "Write reports on what you say, who you meet, what you think." Elena laid a stack of papers on the table, copies of her own reports. "Forgive me. Please forgive me." That night, Celeste took her first dose of sleeping pills. Not to sleep forever, just to stop thinking, stop feeling. At least for a few hours, to be nobody. Not a beauty, not a spy, not a tool. Nobody. New York, 1967. In the office of the CIA's Special Activities Division chief, a meeting is underway. On the table, a folder with photographs of Celeste Harrington, but these aren't the glossy shots from runways that Western magazines printed. These are different photographs. Celeste leaving a pharmacy with prescription drugs. Celeste embracing a bottle of vodka in her own apartment. Celeste with red, tear-stained eyes after another fight with her husband. General Philip Babcock personally oversaw this operation. In his understanding, Harrington had become too unpredictable. The Western press called her an American-style icon, but for the agency, she'd turned into a ticking time bomb. She knew too much, knew too many people, and, most importantly, was losing control over herself. The decision was made at the highest level, not eliminate too visible a figure, but discredit, bring down, make the world lose interest in her. The operation received a cynical name: Fallen Star. The first blow came through the Hartley Agency. New artistic director Patricia Gordon, appointed with direct CIA support, began systematic harassment. Celeste started being removed from major shows under the pretext of not meeting new standards. What standards? Nobody explained. One morning, her photographs simply disappeared from the agency's wall of fame. Young model Georgia Miles later recalled, "It was terrible to watch. Celeste would come to work and they'd tell her, 'You're not participating today.' She'd sit in the dressing room and just stare in the mirror for hours. We were afraid to speak to her. We knew any word of support would be seen as disloyalty to management. But the most vile thing happened in March 1968. Celeste received a call from the office of Secretary of State Dean Rusk. She came to the meeting full of hope. Perhaps they would help. Rusk's deputy met her coldly. On the desk lay photographs, those compromising ones. Celeste with foreign diplomats. Celeste in restaurants with suspicious individuals. Celeste. Many photos were doctored, but did that matter? "You're disgracing American culture with your behavior," the deputy said without meeting her eyes. "As of today, you're barred from all international shows, and I advise you to pull yourself together before it's too late." Celeste left the office and understood this was the end, not of her career, of life as she'd known it. That evening, she drank an entire bottle of Valium, washing it down with vodka. Gregory found her unconscious in the bathroom. Ambulance, hospital, IVs. Official version: food poisoning. Now let's hear from those who saw everything with their own eyes but remained silent for decades. In 2010, shortly before her death, model Mila Romanov gave an interview that was never published in full. Here are fragments from that recording. "We all knew what was happening to Celeste, all of us. But what could we do? Speaking up meant signing our own death warrant. I had 2 children. Others had families, parents. We were hostages. Beautiful, successful hostages." I remember a show at Bloomingdale's, 1969. Celeste was supposed to present the evening collection. She'd always been queen of evening gowns. An hour before the show, Gordon came and said, "Harrington's not going on. She's drunk." It was a lie. I saw Celeste in the dressing room. She was absolutely sober, just her hands were shaking from nerves. But you know what the worst part was? How quickly everyone turned away from her. Yesterday's friends would cross to the other side of the street. Admirers vanished. Even photographers who'd shot only her for years suddenly found new muses. It wasn't natural. It was planned isolation. Another testimony came from photographer Leo Sherstenikov, who worked for Ladies' Home Journal. An order came from above: "Don't shoot Harrington." Just like that, no explanation. I had ready material with her for a cover, Magnificent shots in Central Park. The editor took the folder of photos and threw it in the trash right in front of me. "Forget that name," he said. I tried to save at least the negatives, hid them at home. A week later, gentlemen came with an inspection. How did they know? They confiscated the negatives, warned me. I never worked with Celeste again. Nobody did. Particularly valuable is the testimony of Eleanor Shashkova, costume designer at Hartley Agency. Celeste was systematically driven to breakdown. Her clothes would be accidentally damaged before shows. They'd forget to inform her about schedule changes. Something was being slipped into her coffee. After drinking it, she'd become lethargic, sluggish. Who was slipping it? I don't know, but it happened regularly. Once I tried to warn her, whispered, "Celeste, don't drink anything from the buffet." 2 days later, Agent Bradford called me in. Yes, that same one. "Eleanor," he said sweetly, "your grandson in Boston is doing well at MIT. Good school, prestigious. Would be a shame if he suddenly failed his exams." I understood the hint. But the most shocking testimony came from Dr. Valentina Yashin, psychiatrist who consulted Celeste in her final years. She was being deliberately driven insane. It was sophisticated psychological terror, gaslighting, as we'd say now. Things would be planted in her apartment, and she'd be convinced she bought them herself and forgot. Furniture would be rearranged, and they'd say she was imagining it. Phone calls at night, silence on the line. Celeste would come to me crying, "Doctor, I'm losing my mind. Am I really going crazy?" What could I tell her? That she was being persecuted by the CIA? She knew that herself, but knowledge didn't save her from psychological destruction. 2009, basement facility at CIA headquarters, Langley. Historian archivist Andrew Sokolov receives access to a file marked "Retain permanently, not subject to declassification." But times had changed, and some documents ended up in his hands. What he discovered made him, a man who'd seen everything in CIA archives, step outside several times to smoke and collect himself. File SWAN, operational development of Celeste Harrington, contained over 3,000 pages. Daily surveillance reports, transcripts of phone taps, protocols of intercepted personal correspondence. But the most horrific was hidden in the section Special Measures. Here's an excerpt from Agent Bradford's report dated April 15, 1970. Subject demonstrates increased resistance to psychological influence. Recommend transition to Phase B with application of pharmacological behavior correction. Drug Bluebird has shown effectiveness in similar cases. Dosage per instruction number 47S. What was drug Bluebird? In another document, we find the explanation. Experimental development of CIA Pharmaceutical Division. Psychotropic substance causing depressive states, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts with prolonged application in small doses. How was it administered to Celeste? The answer in the next document. Through Agent Margot, working as buffet attendant at Hartley Agency. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. The file has a section titled Compromising Materials. Photographs meant to destroy Celeste's reputation if she attempted to flee abroad. Many were outright fakes. Photo montages executed at a surprisingly high level for that time. In one, Celeste allegedly in bed with a Western diplomat. In another, at a party with dissidents. All lies, but done so skillfully that distinguishing from truth was impossible. Another document, meeting protocol dated January 3, 1971. Present, Major General Babcock, Colonel Morrison, Agent Bradford, and someone designated as CC Representative, Congressional Committee. Discussing the question of final solution to the Harrington problem. Bradford proposes driving the subject to suicide attempt, then placing in psychiatric facility. Morrison objects. Too much resonance. The media might get interested. The CC representative suggests a compromise: gradual social death. Deprive of work, housing, drive to complete isolation. Let her drink herself to death or take her own life. Clean, quiet, without our direct participation. The file also contains transcripts of surveillance from Celeste's final years. Here's a recording from February 14th, 1985. Celeste, alone in her apartment, talking to herself. Sign of progressing mental disorder. You're here. I know you hear me. Why don't you just kill me? Why these games? I'm already dead for 10 years. Of particular interest is correspondence between CIA headquarters and stations in Paris, Rome, London. Western journalists periodically inquired about the fate of the Red Queen of the runway. The response was standard. Harrington has retired from active work due to health reasons, lives in New York, leads a private life. Not a word of truth. New York, November 15, 1987, 9:47 a.m. The police precinct on West 82nd Street receives a call. Female voice, breaking with excitement. Come quickly, I think she's dead. Apartment 47, building on West 82nd, number 234. Duty Sergeant Petrov records the call, but something in the caller's voice makes him wary. Later, he'll remember. She wasn't crying. She sounded like she'd been waiting for this call. First to arrive is a patrol unit. Junior Lieutenant Igor Savelyev, 23 years old, only a month out of the academy. What he saw in apartment 47 made him run out into the hallway and take a long time to recover. 30 years later, already a retired colonel, he'll talk about that day. You understand, I've seen different deaths. But this, she lay on the bed like Sleeping Beauty from a fairy tale. Burgundy evening gown with sequins, high-heeled shoes. Imagine she put on heels to die. Face perfectly made up, every lash in place. And the smell. The whole room smelled of expensive perfume, but underneath you could sense another smell. Bitter almonds. I didn't know then what that meant, but the senior investigator immediately understood. Cyanide. But here's the strange thing. In the official autopsy, no cyanide was found. Only sleeping pills in lethal dose. How did that happen? I don't know. Documents were rewritten 3 times. I saw the original protocol. It said something completely different. Detective Anatoly Krimov, who handled this case, kept silent for 20 years. But in 2007, dying of cancer, he called a journalist and dictated what didn't make it into official documents. When I arrived at the scene, there were already other people there. Not police. 2 in plain clothes introduced themselves as representatives of the State Department. What State Department at a death scene? But they had documents I had no authority to verify. They were searching the room for something, went through everything but carefully, professionally. Took some folder with papers and a small address book. Neighbor Antonia Kuznetsova tried to tell me something. Said the evening before a man came to Celeste's apartment, tall, in a black coat with a cane. Strange detail, the cane. Who in 1987 walked with a cane? But when the men from State heard about the visitor, they took the neighbor into another room. Half an hour later, she came out pale and didn't remember anything anymore. Nothing at all. And the note? God, that note. Beauty must die beautifully. Forgive me, I'm tired of playing this role. But it wasn't her handwriting. I compared it with documents found in the room, receipts, old letters. Similar, but not identical. Someone tried very hard to imitate her handwriting, but didn't achieve perfect forgery. I wrote about this in my report. The report came back with a resolution. Rewrite, exclude speculation. I rewrote it. But the most mysterious thing began when a man appeared claiming to be Celeste's brother. The problem was she had no brothers, only sister Diane. The man calling himself Nicholas Whitmore appeared 3 days after her death, presented documents that looked authentic, demanded the body be released for burial in Portland. Here begins the real detective story. The neighbor, Antonia Kuznetsova, a week later suddenly remembered one detail. The man with the cane who came to Celeste that last evening spoke with a slight accent, not foreign, regional, as if from the south. And he had a scar on his left hand between thumb and index finger, a very distinctive scar shaped like a crescent moon. Detective Krimov, intrigued by these details, began his own investigation. What he discovered went beyond an ordinary criminal case. In FBI archives, he found mention of a man with similar features. Oliver Rosenberg, former CIA operative, specialist in wet work. Officially died in 1983 in a car accident, but the body was identified by documents. Face was mutilated beyond recognition. Krimov kept digging and found a connection between Rosenberg and Celeste Harrington. Turns out in 1962 they crossed paths in Paris. Rosenberg was working undercover as a cultural attaché. Celeste was there for shows. According to unconfirmed data, they had an affair, brief but passionate. It ended suddenly. Rosenberg was recalled to Washington and they never met again. Or did they? In Celeste's apartment, after the body was removed, a strange thing was found. Under a floorboard lay a small package, an old photograph and a note. In the photo, Celeste and a man whose face had been carefully cut out. On the back, date, Paris, May 1962. The note contained just one phrase. "I'll come back for you. Wait." Oh. The investigation unexpectedly continued in 1993. A woman came to journalist Vladimir Melnikov, who was writing a book about American models. Called herself Marina, didn't give surname. Said she'd worked as a nurse at a classified CIA medical facility in the 80s. "I can't stay silent anymore," she began, nervously wringing a handkerchief. What they did to Celeste Harrington, it was monstrous. They brought her to us regularly, starting in '72, officially for treatment of nervous exhaustion. Actually, Marina fell silent, gathering strength. What she told next was incomprehensible. There existed a secret program, Marionette, psychopharmacological control over people representing operational interest. Celeste was one of the test subjects. She was injected with experimental drugs designed to destroy will, make her suggestible, controllable. But she proved too strong. Her psyche resisted. I remember one case. It was in '75. Celeste was brought in after another breakdown. The chief physician, Colonel Archipov of Medical Service, personally conducted the session. They used a combination of drugs and hypnosis, tried to convince her that her entire life in the spotlight was a hallucination, a sick fantasy, that she'd never been a famous model, that it was all a dream. You know what she said when she came out of hypnosis? "Doctor, even if it's a dream, it's more beautiful than your reality." Archipov was furious, ordered the dose increased. I tried to object. It could kill her. He looked at me and said, "Sometimes death is mercy." But Celeste survived. Moreover, she started pretending the treatment was working, played the role of a broken, submissive woman, and at nights, when she thought no one was watching, she would write. Tiny letters on toilet paper, hiding notes in the most unimaginable places. I'd find them accidentally when cleaning the room. One note said, "They think they've broken me. Let them think so. I'm waiting. He promised to return, and I believe. Even if I have to wait in hell, I'll wait." Marina pulled a yellowed piece of paper from her bag, one of those notes. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Or that me you knew is gone. They erased my past, my present, trying to erase my future. but they can't erase the main thing. Love. It's stronger than their drugs, their hypnosis, their system. O knows the truth. O will come. Meanwhile, I'm playing my last role, the crazy former beauty. They won't give me an Oscar for it, but I know it's my best role, because it will save the one I love. Melnikov tried to find this mysterious O, but all traces led nowhere. Rosenberg, possibly, but why didn't he appear earlier? And did he appear at all that last evening? In 1995, an event occurred that added new mysteries. In Paris, in an antique shop in Montmartre, a suitcase with Celeste Harrington's belongings was discovered. How did it get there? The shop owner bought it at an auction of unclaimed items. Inside, dresses, photographs, letters, and a diary. A small notebook in leather binding filled with her handwriting. The last entry dated November 10th, 1987, 5 days before her death. He came. After so many years, he returned. Aged, with gray at his temples, but it's him. My O. He offers escape. He has new documents for me. Tickets to Argentina. Argentina so far from this hell. But can I? Do I have the strength? And most importantly, will I believe this isn't another hallucination, not a cruel game of my tortured consciousness? Tomorrow he comes for an answer. What will I tell him? But in the official file, there's no diary. French police handed it to the American embassy. From there, it should have reached investigators, but it didn't. Disappeared, like so much in this story. Let's stop for a minute and think. Imagine you're a model at Hartley Agency, 1972. Your colleague, that same Celeste Harrington, who until recently was an icon, a star of the first magnitude, now sits in the dressing room with trembling hands. You see how she's humiliated, how they mock her. What do? Speak up? Support her? Or stay silent? Delina Milovskaya chose silence, and 40 years later, that silence was tearing her apart inside. In 2012, already an 80-year-old woman, she agreed to an interview. Not an interview, a confession. 3 hours of recording, tears, long pauses when she couldn't speak from shame. You know what the worst thing about the system is? It makes everyone participants. We all knew what was happening to Celeste, saw how they poisoned her, drove her to madness, and we stayed silent. Why? Fear, yes, of course. But not only. There was also envy. Yes, don't be surprised. Envy of the one being destroyed. Because even broken, even at the bottom, Celeste remained what we'd never become. She'd been where we were forbidden to go. Paris, Rome, London. Pierre Cardin kissed her hand. Visconti wanted to film her, and we were extras in her tragedy. I remember one moment, 73. Celeste was practically no longer allowed on the runway. She sat in the dressing room watching us prepare for the show and suddenly said, "Gal, treasure your mediocrity. It's the only thing that will protect you from them." I was offended then, thought, how dare she, even now, at the bottom, humiliate us? Only later did I understand. She was trying to warn me. Warn me to never, you hear, never try to become more than I was allowed to be. But there's testimony that gives a completely different angle to this story. Elena Metelkina, the same one who confessed to Celeste about spying, many years later told her daughter the truth. The daughter recorded this on a dictaphone a month before her mother's death. Mom tormented herself with guilt her whole life, said she'd betrayed her only real friend. But you know what else she told me? That Celeste knew about her reports from the very beginning, knew and continued to be friends with her, trust her with secrets. Mom asked her about it that evening when she confessed. Celeste answered, "Elena, darling, you think I have a choice who to be friends with?" At least you suffer from conscience. Others sell me out with pleasure. But the most horrible thing, Mom told about one case. 1976, they sent a young model to Celeste, Svetlana. Beautiful, ambitious, ready for anything for a career. Her task was to seduce a man Celeste was in love with then, some Italian journalist who'd come to do a story on American fashion. Svetlana tried hard, flirted, batted eyes, and suddenly Celeste approached her and said, "Sweetie, you're beautiful and you'll probably succeed. But remember, they'll then make you write a detailed report. What he said in bed, what birthmarks he has on his body, what he sighed about in his sleep. And 12 men at Langley will read that report and discuss it and laugh. Ready for that?" Svetlana went pale and left. A week later, she was transferred to the LA office. Celeste saved her from dirt, from shame, at the cost of her own loneliness again. But there were also those who don't stay silent, even now. In 2018, Patricia Gordon died, that same agency director who actively participated in Celeste's persecution. On her deathbed, she called a priest. Not for confession, for justification. The priest, Father Michael, later recounted this conversation. With the dying woman's permission, she wanted it heard. She said she had no choice, that if she hadn't agreed to destroy Harrington, they would have destroyed her. And not just her husband, daughter, grandchildren. "I chose family," she kept repeating. Any mother would choose family. But in her eyes I saw not certainty but pleading. She was begging me to agree, to confirm she'd done the right thing. I stayed silent. Then she said something terrible. "You know, Father, sometimes I think maybe Celeste was happier than all of us. She at least died free. And we lived all these years in fear that one day they'd come for us." There exists a photograph taken in 1961 in Paris. Celeste Harrington stands on the balcony of Hotel Plaza Athénée. Below, evening Paris, lights of the Eiffel Tower. She's not posing, just looking into the distance. The photographer captured a moment of absolute happiness. Those who look at this photo now find it hard to believe this woman would end her days in a shabby apartment, forgotten by all. But let's try to understand who Celeste Harrington was for her era. Just a beautiful woman? A victim of the system? Or something more? French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy, who met Celeste in the 60s, wrote remarkable lines about her. She was living refutation of the control system. Her very existence proved that beauty doesn't submit to ideology. Washington thought they were using her as a weapon, but beauty can't be a weapon. It can only be itself. And that was Celeste's tragedy. She was too authentic for a fake world. And here's what Pierre Cardin wrote in his memoirs. "When I first saw Celeste, I understood before me wasn't just a model. This was a woman mystery, a woman contradiction. In her, the incompatible merged, American openness and European mystery, Anglo-Saxon pragmatism and Latin passion, childlike naivety and ancient wisdom. She was like those Russian Matryoshka dolls. You open one, and inside is another, and so on to infinity." But the most piercing testimony left a man nobody expected to hear from. In 2001, in Buenos Aires, an elderly man known to neighbors as Don Oliver died. Before death, he gave his lawyer a sealed envelope with a request to send it to America, to the New York Times editorial office. The envelope contained a letter. "I'm writing this knowing I don't have long. My real name will mean nothing to you. In America, I've been considered dead since 1983. But I must tell the truth about Celeste Harrington's last days. Yes, I was there. I came for her, as I'd promised many years ago. We met in Paris in 1962. I was working, doesn't matter in what capacity. What matters is, I fell in love with her at first sight. And she saw in me not a CIA operative, not a man of the system. She saw simply a man ready to do anything for her. When I was recalled from Paris, I understood we were deliberately separated. Celeste was becoming uncontrollable, and a Celeste in love, even more so. I was offered a choice, forget her or disappear. I chose a third option, faked my death and went deep underground. 15 years I prepared her escape, created new identities, sought reliable channels, saved money. And in November '87 I returned, found her in that terrible apartment. God, what they'd done to her. But you know what? When she saw me, that same fire flashed in her eyes. She recognized me. After all those years, after all the experiments and drugs, she recognized me. I offered her escape. Everything was ready. Documents in the name of Maria Rodriguez, tickets to Argentina via Vienna, money, safe house in Buenos Aires. She agreed, said she'd come in 3 days, just needed to say goodbye to her sister. But she didn't come. I waited at the meeting place 6 hours, then went to her apartment. Neighbor said Celeste had locked herself in her room and wouldn't let anyone in. I begged her to open. She answered through the door. "Leave, Oliver. Leave and live for both of us. I'm too tired, and they'll never let me go. Even if I leave, they'll find me, and I can't run anymore. Forgive me." Those were the last words I heard from her. 2 days later, I learned of her death. No, I don't believe in suicide. I think she knew they'd come for her as soon as they learned of my visit, and she chose to go on her own terms. Like a queen. I went to Argentina alone, lived here 14 years. Every day, thought of her. You know what she told me at our last meeting? "Oliver, we won. They think they broke me, but they didn't. I loved, was loved, lived a real life, and they were always dead. Just didn't know it. Forgive me, Celeste. Forgive me for not being able to save you. But I fulfilled your request. I lived for both of us. And every day of this life was dedicated to you." The letter caused shock. CIA, FBI, all denied such a person's existence. But facts are stubborn things. In archives, traces were found. Fragmentary, erased, but traces. Operation Return, dated November '87. Search for extremely dangerous defector. Order for elimination if discovered. So we've reached the end of this story, or the beginning, because each time it seems all the I's are dotted, a new detail appears, new testimony, a new document that turns everything upside down. Let's be honest, the full truth about Celeste Harrington, we may never know. Too many documents destroyed, too many witnesses took their secrets to the grave. Too many lies layered on truth over these decades. The story you just heard was assembled piece by piece from dozens of sources: contemporaries' memoirs, declassified documents, interviews, diaries, accidentally preserved photographs. Some facts are documented. Yes, Celeste Harrington was indeed the first American model to conquer world runways. Yes, she worked at Hartley Agency. Yes, her career ended under mysterious circumstances. Yes, she died November 15th, 1987, at age 52. But much remains in the realm of suppositions and testimonies impossible to verify. Was she recruited by the CIA? Was she used as a honey trap for foreign diplomats? Were psychopharmacological experiments conducted on her? Was there a mysterious Oliver Rosenberg who faked his death for love? Everyone is free to draw their own conclusions. What we know for certain is that Celeste Harrington became a symbol of beauty that doesn't fit in boxes, a symbol of talent the system tries to put in its service, a symbol of a person crushed by history's millstones, but who preserved dignity to the end. Famous American cultural critic Harold Bloom once said, "The Harrington story isn't a detective novel or melodrama. It's ancient Greek tragedy staged in Cold War America. A heroine endowed with divine gift of beauty challenges fate and perishes. But her death isn't defeat, it's apotheosis. She died as she lived, beautifully." Now let's remember Celeste Harrington's own words from one of her last interviews, given in 1970 to French magazine Elle. "Beauty isn't something you possess. It's something that possesses you. You can try to sell it, trade it for fame, money, love, but in the end, it demands the ultimate price: your life. And you know what? I'm ready to pay. Because living without beauty, that's not living at all." Perhaps in these words lies the answer. Celeste Harrington wasn't a victim. She was a warrior fighting for the right to be herself in a world where individuality was considered a crime. Did she lose or win? You decide. There's a legend. They say at the old Hartley Agency building on Fifth Avenue, which no longer exists in its former form, sometimes at night you can hear footsteps, light, graceful, as if someone in high-heeled shoes is walking down a runway. Security guards swear they've seen several times the silhouette of a woman in an evening gown. She appears for an instant and vanishes, leaving behind a barely perceptible aroma of French perfume. Fiction? Mass hallucination? Or maybe Celeste Harrington's soul still walks her eternal runway, showing the world what no one could take from her: beauty, grace, dignity. We'll never know the whole truth, but perhaps we don't need to, because Celeste Harrington long ago stopped being just a woman of flesh and blood. She became a myth, a legend, a warning and inspiration simultaneously. Dear friends, thank you for walking this difficult path with us. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. We understand it raises many questions, many emotions, perhaps disputes and disagreements, and that's normal. It means Celeste Harrington's story is still alive, still matters, still makes us think about the price of beauty, freedom, love. We tried to be as objective as possible, rely on available sources, compare facts, but we also understand that in a story where personal tragedy and state machinery intertwined, love and betrayal, art and politics, it's impossible to dot all the I's. And maybe we don't need to. What do you think about Celeste Harrington's fate? Was she a victim of the system, or did she choose her own path? Is what eyewitnesses tell true, or has time distorted their memories? Did mysterious Oliver exist, ready for anything for love? And most importantly, could this story have ended differently? Write in the comments your opinion. Share this video with friends. Let them also learn about the woman who became a symbol of an entire era. Hit like if this story touched you, made you think, didn't leave you indifferent. And remember, beauty is a force capable of changing the world, but it's also responsibility. Responsibility to be yourself in a world constantly trying to make us someone else. Celeste Harrington's story isn't just one woman's story. It's a story about all of us, about our dreams and fears, about the price we're willing to pay for truth, about the choice between security and freedom. Her life ended 37 years ago, but the questions she left remain relevant today. What's more important? Success or dignity? Security or freedom? A long, mediocre life or a short but brilliant one? Everyone will have their own answer, and that, perhaps, is Celeste Harrington's main lesson. She doesn't give ready answers. She forces us to seek them independently. Thank you for your attention. Until next time, and remember, beauty will save the world, if the world allows itself to be saved.